Blades Brown, by the way. Blades Brown. I mean, he's got the name.
Oh,
And by the way, his first name is named after his mother's maiden name, who was a WNBA player. She was a professional athlete. I mean, this kid's got chops, but I don't know if you saw the new...
Wait, what? We got to talk about Blades Brown for a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Not only is it a better golf name than Bagger Vance, it might be a better name than 𝘓𝘬𝘐𝑠.
It's really good. Welcome to Wait, What? Sports Biz Chat with DP and McGee, the podcast that takes an often irreverent, sometimes cynical, and on occasion even a serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, 𝘬𝘪𝘭𝘢.
And I'm Tim McGee.
Well, Tim, Super Bowl 60 is set with the Seattle Seahawks taking on the New England Patriots at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, California. Brooks Koepka rejoins the PGA Tour this weekend at the Farmers in San Diego. The Winter Games open in Italy late next week, and the world seems a little bit upside down. Before I turn it over to ask you about your first big topic, I did need to ask you. Sam Darnold, Jets' first-round pick, third pick overall in the 2018 draft. How are you feeling about him leading the Seahawks to the Super Bowl as a Jets fan?
Excuse me while I take this knife out of my back that you just inserted in there. Listen, I'm really happy for the kid. I don't know if it's like dyslexic schadenfreude or what, but I'm happy that the team I root for is being shown once again to be a horrible developer of talent, if not a horrible predictor of talent. I'm really happy for the kid. He's had a couple of stops along the way, most notably Minnesota last year, Seattle this year, but San Francisco, Carolina, and he's developed into a real good leader. And you combine that with the fact that I hate the Patriots and all things New England.
It's a win-win.
Let's go Seattle. Let's go Seattle. And I believe the first line I saw was 5.5.
Yeah. I've seen it a little narrower than that, but
Yeah.
it and they look strong.
Yeah, it should be a great game.
Yeah, you're right. By the way, and the Jets are going to take the heat on that because that's where he was drafted. Obviously, they saw something in him, but sometimes it does take a while to develop. The Minnesota one, I think, is a little because they didn't seem to want to give much time there, and then he goes in the first year, and even though he had some injuries late, I mean, he's just looked solid. He didn't get shell shock from his experiences at any of these other places, it looks like, although for a while with the Jets, it seemed like he might have been.
Yeah, Minnesota decided to go all in on J.J. McCarthy, so...
Yeah. Well, Listen, I will say this to you, Tim. I think that's a very healthy attitude, and I want to applaud you for that.
Well, thank you.
All right. So what's on your mind?
So many things. But let's start with the latest rounds of playoffs and some of the numbers that were put up. Talking about the Patriots, that game against the Texans... 38 million viewers on ESPN, which is amazing in and of itself. But what I found fascinating was that was the single most watched game in ESPN history. So even more than the Scripps Spelling Bee, strongest man in the world competition, throw them all out the window. Texans Pats, 38 million fans. Bills Broncos, 39.6 million. 49ers Seahawks, 32 million.
I assume you're leading up to the game that did the biggest numbers here.
Which game was that?
Bears-Rams.
I don't even have that here, but yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Which you knew that was going to be that was the featured game that night, and it's LA,
had
Chicago.
The best window. It had the best window and so forth.
Yeah, and that game peaked at 52.6.
Yeah. And then along those same lines, if we go back to the Indiana-Miami game, 30.1 million, up 36% from the game the year before, Notre Dame, Ohio State, which you would think would have a much bigger audience given the two teams and support for those guys. But biggest viewership in a national championship game since 2015. So a lot of people rooting for the underdogs and watching.
Yeah. Well, as always, we will next week be putting in our Super Bowl viewership predictions. I'm curious if if the Bad Bunny Green Day quote unquote controversy is going to affect people, I say no. But it will be interesting with these markets. I mean, obviously the Patriots have a huge national following in a big market. Seattle, I don't think has the following, obviously, as some of the other teams that might have been vying for it. But it's the Super Bowl, and it's gonna, now with the big data factoring in,
I think it's.
I expect it's going to be big.
Yeah, I don't see how it doesn't set records. But
Right.
we can talk about that more next week.
Right.
What's on your mind?
I'm going to take on a subject that we have certainly talked about in the past, but haven't in a while, and that's NWSL. And I found this story interesting because of the ongoing CBA discussions we've been having, covering both what's going on in the WNBA and, of course, what will be going on with Major League Baseball during the upcoming season. And that is that Trinity Rodman, who's one of the top stars in the league, plays, of course, for the Washington Spirit, daughter of Dennis Rodman, girlfriend of Ben Shelton. I mean, this is like rock star status player, and she's really good. She had agreed on a one-to-one level with the Spirit on a $2 million deal that Jessica Berman had to basically veto because it went against what the rules were in the existing CBA and the salary cap, et cetera. But given the demand for someone like Trinity Rodman, who was getting wooed to play in Europe where there are no caps and the money could have been a lot bigger, the league came up with a high-impact player rule. I decided to sign, but at that point, because it was like a one-off, then the Players Association got all bent out of shape, and rightfully so because of the way. So you'd expect it to be that way, and they were upset when Berman had vetoed the original thing because it harmed a player. So it just shows you kind of the vagaries of some of these rules and so forth. I think it is important. NWSL in the world of women's football is, I think, considered the top league. You may have a different view of that, but given the strength of European soccer, of course, and their commitment to the women's side, I think you can see some of the top players getting wooed away. So I think it was an important thing to try to keep Trinity Rodman in NWSL, and they did. So hopefully the deal did go through. So any fighting seems to have been put behind us. But it's a big story as it relates to labor negotiations.
Yeah, I think it's great for the sport. I think in hindsight, it would have been great if the league got out in front of this so they didn't have to tick off the Players Association both coming and going. Yeah. I'm not sure if she wore the captain's armband, but Trinity Rodman did score in a friendly for the U.S. women's team shortly after this deal was done. You're right. She is the real deal. Mm-hmm. And, we've got a Women's World Cup coming up in 2 years. So hopefully NWSL can keep the best talent here at home, which is very difficult to do on the men's side.
Yeah. What's next for you?
What do I got here? So many things. Olympic ad inventory sold out a month in advance. Kudos to Peter Lazarus and the guys over at NBC Universal for that. I'm going to talk about the Olympics a little bit more in our closing segment, but we've got a great guest today who's been involved in the Olympic movement for over 25 years as an executive and as a medal winner. So we're teasing his appearance a little bit. So that's pretty interesting. What else do I got? College football playoffs? Want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I think we had an expectation that it was going to expand, but it seems like the parties in power, if you will, don't seem to be in agreement on where that goes. So as we sit here now, we're looking at another year at 12 teams.
Well, it's interesting you say the powers that be. You would think it would be the committee or the university presidents or, a consortium of conference commissioners, but it really comes down to two guys.
Yes,
right. Tony Petitti at the Big Ten and Greg Sankey at the SEC, and they couldn't come to an agreement. I think Petitti wanted a 24 team and Sankey wanted 16 teams, and they couldn't come to an agreement on that. It's interesting that how much power the Big Ten has now when you have the last three champions.
Right. I had, last week when we talked about this, I was thinking that Sankey was the one that wanted even more teams because he seemed to be hinting that previously, but obviously the Big Ten, had its year. And so it was kind of interesting that it was Petitti that was really pushing the larger number. But, Listen, Jim Phillips in the ACC, Brett Yormark at Big 12 obviously has a strong position to play. I think he's done some pretty impressive things there. And then Notre Dame's kind of position in this whole thing, even with that television contract running for a few more years on NBC, it seems like they're slightly muted in their power. And it's largely because the elevation of Sankey and Petitti, I think, Big Ten or SEC and Big Ten respectfully, it just keeps growing, and that's where it's at.
The animosity, is that the right word? Maybe it's a little bit too strong, but the frustration with Notre Dame, it seems to be growing.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they've been promised a spot in next year's playoffs certainly has rubbed a lot of teams and schools the wrong way, and I think they have a right to be ticked off at something like that. I don't know if that is tenable in the long term, having Notre Dame sitting outside the Power 5 or Power 4, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if Pac-12 reclaims a place in the Power 5 in the coming years, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch, especially given the fact that Notre Dame plays, and we've talked about this in the past, that Notre Dame plays in the ACC in other sports. So it would seem to make sense from a consistency standpoint. It would make sense for them to join the ACC. From a geographic perspective, it might make more sense to join the Big Ten. Although, who would have thought that you'd have teams coast to coast in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I think the conventional wisdom right after when Notre Dame went so strong at Phillips and the ACC, and I'm not saying that the ACC behind the scenes wasn't saying we have to get Miami in here. I tend to agree that the reaction to them has been slightly different. I think Notre Dame, as they typically have, felt that they had the upper hand in being able to say what they wanted to say, and it sounds like people aren't buying it anymore. No offense to I know we have some regular listeners that are big time Notre Dame people.
I'm a fan of Notre Dame. I'm just saying from a competitive standpoint, is it tenable for them to remain independent in the long term?
What do you think about doing a spotlight on sponsorship?
Well, I think that's a great idea.
How do we feel about these sponsorship deals?
Want to start? I know you had one. You had a patch deal you wanted to talk about.
In the world of MLS, Inter Miami has just separated itself, right? They have the greatest player to ever play the game. Everything they do is at a different level than the rest of the league. Lowe's signed recently as a patch partner, and it's being, it's almost being looked at or treated as though this was a stadium naming rights deal with the way the dollars are. But, with companies wanting to have a piece of the, a piece of Messi and this team, I think it's a great development for the league, and I think it does suggest that with the right player mix, that the money coming into these teams could be substantial. So I think overall it's a really good thing for the league. Obviously, really great for Inter. So yeah, I just kind of got a kick out of the way it's been reported, almost as though this was like the big new stadium rights deal. I'm not saying a patch deal is an insignificant deal. It's very, very important.
Yeah. And speaking of patch deals, the NCAA recently announced that they were going to allow jersey patch sales on uniforms, once more blurring the line between collegiate and professional sports. I don't begrudge the NCAA or the teams for doing that. It is going to be a significant revenue stream for some schools and some programs. You get programs like Duke, like UConn, maybe even in North Carolina. They're going to be right up there with some of the NBA team deals. You get Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Indiana. You're going to get some very significant 8-figure deals being done in the coming months. And so, you're smiling. So I'm going to stop now.
I'm smiling because you opened it by talking about the continued blurring between the two levels. And given that there's now this whole thing going on out there about and legal action being taken, we talked about Mensah from Duke, the quarterback, who's now they've settled and he's able to leave, but these other players going back and now literally being allowed to play, and then legal action being taken, and whether they're not. This was a big thing last week with an Alabama basketball player. So yes, there is no difference anymore.
I would argue against myself and say the only difference is The running rules are very clear in professional sports as it relates to how contracts are handled, who is allowed to negotiate a contract on a player's behalf, what that agent can be paid. None of those things exist in the collegiate world right now. And the example I give is if Cody Bellinger had not re-signed with the Yankees, Aaron Judge can't say, I'm going to leave and I'm going to go play for the Dodgers because you didn't sign this guy. He's got a contract that ties him to the team. There's no such, and the 𝘓𝘵 situation, which by the way, if his nickname isn't genius, his teammates are missing out on a great opportunity. But with that 𝘓𝘵 situation is one in which, it just shows that these, as 𝘎𝘰𝘸𝘢 would have said, verbal agreements aren't worth the paper they're written on.
Yeah, and we're constantly stress testing everything that's kind of coming through. I mean, someone tries something and, it's reported and then this is where, particularly in football, where the NCAA has no involvement in.
They cede it all.
Charlie Baker-led NCAA has no involvement or authority, so the conferences have more power, and it just makes things very challenging. There's no across the board CBA guiding this stuff
unless Charlie Baker and the NCAA decides to start leading from ahead instead of leading from behind. I can't see the NCAA being anything more than a really big event production company in the coming years.
I totally agree with that, other than the fact that he can't leap ahead on the football side because it's all
No, he's got no power. But he can do it in the other sports.
Yeah.
He can do it in the other sports.
Yeah.
And listen, I've not been a big fan of John Calipari over the course of his career. I think
he's a man of reason.
He is speaking out and speaking out forcefully about some of the nonsense that's going on the men's basketball side. Guys, declaring for the draft, playing in the G League, and then coming back and claiming that they can play in college basketball. That's just absurd. What's next? Bring Jimmer Fredette back, give him another year at BYU? I mean, come on.
Before we go to the big one that we wanted to talk about in this, I do want to make a quick comment, and maybe it's because Romo continues to get worse, although he was okay this past weekend on the kind of lead color commentary side.
Everybody's jumping off the Romo bandwagon.
Well, but I think
Brady.
part of it, honestly, because Nance isn't where he used to be either, by the way. And I've loved Jim Nance over his career. Brady's Pizza Hut ad is good. The Hut thing, he crushes it. This is before I say I'm going to be pulling for the Seahawks, so I give some credit to Brady again. All right. What's the big one, Tim, that we wanted to talk about in this spotlight on sponsorship?
Well, Polymarket, the prediction market, has signed a huge deal with Major League Soccer. And we have talked about this in the past. I think I don't want to speak for you, but I would say that I have major concerns about Polymarket. It is unregulated. I don't know how it could become an issue for Major League Soccer, but I do know that the Gaming Association, which oversees all of the other betting companies and sports books, has voiced very serious concerns about prediction markets and the fact that they are unregulated. So, kudos for MLS for getting that deal done. Let's see what happens with it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm in your camp. I'm concerned about this. I do think that they are trying to get out ahead of the things that people would be talking about, minimizing the types of bets that they can, yellow cards, et cetera, things like that, which seem to be simply manipulated. So while I think it's good that they're doing that and announcing that as part of their deal, my view is, and I commented on this, a friend of mine, Adam Lassner, former City guy, he writes this good series on LinkedIn where he kind of looks at different things, and he was pretty positive on the deal. My comment back was that, and this is stuff that you've said, over time, just the more and more stuff that's out there, the people trying to game the system get ahead of it. So like how quickly can we update the guardrails to make sure that it doesn't happen? So, and I get it. They can't leave the money on the table or don't want to leave what is obviously very available money. But to me, there's just this continued fraying, particularly the credibility of the game and that relationship with the sport and the fans, particularly the non-betting fans. I'm just worried about will continue to get frayed, not just because another scandal may be around the corner, but because there's just so much emphasis on that side of the business, whether it's, the more traditional sports betting or the gambling through these prediction markets.
Yeah, you think about some of the things that can be bet on. How much extra time will there be? Red cards, yellow cards, things like that. I don't know. Listen, I wish them well, and we'll see what happens.
Hey, before we take a break, I did want to quickly talk about the PGA Tour versus LIV, if you will. There was big news coming out the week before with the reigning NCAA golf champion Michael Lasasso signing with Phil Mickelson's team on LIV. It was a big deal. I'm guessing they did a lot of paid social on it because I was getting stuff on my feed like nonstop. And then the week after that, and this was right after Brooks had announced he was leaving, Koepka's playing this week at the Farmers at Torrey Pines. But then right after that, Lasasso, this 18-year-old phenom, I guess, out of Nashville, who decided to go pro, has been playing Korn Ferry, gets a sponsor exemption to the Amex.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up in the final round after shooting a 60, almost narrowly missed a 59. Ends up getting paired with Siwoo Kim and world number one Scottie Scheffler in the final round. He fades a little bit, ties for 18th. Scheffler's so good, it's ridiculous.
I know, that's got to be intimidating.
But
it's like doing a podcast with you, right? It's got to be very intimidating for the kid. I'm still not over my fear.
Golf Channel, I did not think did a good job because I was excited to get tuned into that. It was not the right time to have that tournament exclusively on Golf Channel. Mm-hmm. I know that they're going up against AFC and NFC championship games, but that could have been exposed. 18-year-old kid, really impressive. Blades Brown, by the way. Blades Brown. I mean, he's got the name.
Oh.
And by the way, his first name is named after his mother's maiden name, who was a WNBA player. She was a professional athlete. I mean, this kid's got chops. He played like 8 days in a row because he had a Korn Ferry tournament, and he gets this exemption, plays. He's not going to be playing at the Farmers, it doesn't look like, although I think they should try to get him in because I'd love to see him get a Masters exemption. Anyway, it was a bit of a salvo, I think. Not that they planned it, it just kind of worked out. But I don't know if you saw the new...
Wait, what? We got to talk about Blades Brown for a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Not only is it a better golf name than Bagger Vance, it might be a better name than Shooter McGavin.
It's really good. It's really good.
Blades Brown.
He's from Nashville. And on top of this, the PGA Tour, and this is definitely going right at LIV, right? Their new tour campaign, their slogan, have you seen it?
No.
Where the best belong. And then they have Patrick Reed is kind of giving some indication that maybe he's open to things. So, and then Rory came out during a press conference recently, and Rory's very outspoken, as we know, saying that it doesn't seem like the guys are all feeling like they're getting what they felt they were promised from LIV. Of course, DJ, because he has nowhere else to go anymore, he re-signed with them and said that it's all good, but we'll see what happens. I'm sounding like I'm kind of knocking them, but the fact that like both sides are playing this drama, LIV did what it did when they got Lasasso, and then, kind of the tour bounced back and had this news with this kid, but then also came out with their campaign and have Brooks coming back. And he was welcomed with, they have shots of him on the driving range and practice round and stuff like that.
Prodigal son.
Exactly.
I will make a prediction that Blades Brown is not going to get and it would make perfect sense for him to get a razor sponsor. But the kid looks about 10 years old.
Yeah.
He's not shaving. He's not shaving for several years.
Yeah, and he's got an interesting swing. A lot of people do compare it to DeChambeau. A lot of people are kind of doing a very somewhat technical swing, but quite simple. I think all these golfers, I think anybody walks in and it's a very different style than when Tiger was intimidating people. Like you were playing against Tiger and you just didn't think you had a chance. I don't think anyone thinks they have a chance against Scheffler right now, the way he's striking the ball. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's different level.
They'll say they're not intimidated.
Amex had this unbelievable final round, good tournament, great branding, and it ended up not being able to expand beyond that super hardcore that would want to seek this out on Golf Channel. That was my point. I'm sure contractual elements demanded that it not be anywhere but Golf Channel, but felt like it was a big miss. Now, our guy Blades wasn't playing that great on Sunday, but should they have talked to him right after the round? He was in the final round. They gave Scheffler a hug. They interviewed Scheffler. I'm sure he was annoyed and not happy with himself, but how do you not grab him and have him interviewed? I just felt like there were some misses on that.
What do you say? Take a break?
Let's do it.
It's time for our guest.
We are back, and as we mentioned earlier, we are really pleased to welcome our next guest. 𝘕𝘪𝘭𝘢 is an Olympic medalist in the sport of luge. In fact, he was, with an asterisk, the first U.S. medalist in the sport of luge. And 𝘕𝘪, you can tell that story about how you and Chris Thorpe were guaranteed a medal, but moved up on the podium as a result of a later competitors going down the track. But 𝘕𝘪 competed in 3 Olympic Games, including the silver medal that they won in Nagano in 1998. He also won 2 silver medals at the FIL World Luge Cups in 1995 and 96, and he won the overall Luge World Cup men's doubles title in 1996-97 season. He is currently the head of marketing for USA Luge, the national governing body dedicated to bringing home medals for the sliding sport, especially in the upcoming Milano Cortina Games. 𝘕𝘪, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm standing outside in the cold as we speak. Happy to be here, nonetheless.
Well, 𝘕𝘪, I tell the story about you and I being on the top of the luge run in the middle of the day in August, and it was 35 degrees. So you're used to being out in the cold. This year's games, as we said, are going to be in Milano Cortina. Interesting, 2 separate cities. There are actually going to be 2 different opening ceremonies for the athletes. And I asked you about this, and I would love for you to share with our listeners. What is the importance to Olympic athletes of the opening ceremonies, especially for those athletes who are competing in their first games?
The opening ceremonies is kind of, it's sort of the confirmation of it all. That's where you really feel like you're an Olympian. And it's that moment where you're marching in behind the flag and you're a part of the Parade of Nations, and it's something that you've seen on TV, and if you're like me, you aspired to do it, and then all of a sudden you're there and you're doing it. It really does feel like it's a part of something bigger. I think a lot of it gets lost in the Olympic movement a little bit, but that is the moment where it does feel like you're representing your country and doing it in a positive way, in a sort of positive environment.
We get to interview executives all the time and learn their business, but I have to tell you, I'm a huge fan of anyone that either aspires and then eventually makes it into the Olympics. So this is huge for me to have this discussion. I want you to go a little deeper on that and talk about the overall experience as a luger, not just from your standpoint, but from the athletes that USA Luge actually represents. You're traveling to Europe, in this beautiful part of the world. What do you expect that experience to be like for the team, and what was that experience like for you as an Olympic athlete? Because that fascinates me.
Well, the athletes are on the road quite a bit, so we should start there.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something different about showing up and getting ready to race in an Olympic Games and being a part of the not only the ceremony but the training. It just feels different, and it's just bigger, and it's, I don't know, it's not only the media magnifying glass and attention. It's kind of like I was alluding to about the opening ceremonies, is that now you're here and you're doing your job. The ceremony stuff is really cool, but when you start training, that's where the rubber meets the road, and you got to perform and do your job. David, I don't know that I'm answering your question really, but
you are. No, understood. All good.
I have a quick follow-up before I ask you my next question, 𝘕𝘪, is when in the games will the sliding competition be for luge?
Sliding competitions always up front at the early part of the games. So opening ceremonies is Friday. It's men's singles Saturday and Sunday, women's singles Sunday, Monday, doubles Tuesday, and then Wednesday is the team relay, and that's that. So we're done relatively early.
So your athletes can enjoy the rest of the games if they choose to stay through the closing ceremonies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a huge advantage of going early, is that you get to watch other events and, maybe blow off some steam and have some fun.
Yeah. So you've You've been involved in the Olympic movement and the sport of luge for over a quarter century. You've been a slider for even longer than that, right? Starting as a kid in the
Yeah.
developmental program. But since you've been actively involved in the Olympic movement, how has it changed in the last 25 years or so since you've been involved?
It's funny. It's changed in a lot of ways, but in so many ways, it's exactly the same. You know, I think that the leadership has certainly changed at the top, at the IOC level. You've seen a little bit. I think there's been some positive leadership changes and moving forward, but at the same time, and I should say that obviously on the media side, things are constantly changing. And on the sponsorship side, for me, it's constantly evolving. And I know I'm just kind of hitting all these points without really digging into them deeply. But let me go back to the media side. The media side is obviously we've seen things just go in completely different directions in the last, obviously social media. But then on the sponsorship side, it's been very interesting to see how USA Luge, we're not the NFL, we're never going to be like a numbers based kind of sponsorship. We're about storytelling, we're about athlete achievement, we're a mix of sports marketing, but also at the same time cause marketing in that we are a smaller sport. So, that's been fairly consistent, I would say. And the way we market our sport hasn't really changed tremendously either, other than the obvious social media stuff. That's the big caveat.
We're going to keep you in the cold and dive into the sponsorship thing in a little bit first and make you stay out there. So you'll have plenty of time to talk because we want you to stay cold.
I'm gonna duck into a warm car here for 1 second.
All right.
Please. I feel horrible.
Okay. I'm gonna Tim will like this this term. I'm gonna dolly back a little bit now.
Oh, wow.
You just pointed out you've been involved in the Olympic Games or the Olympic movement, specifically with USA Luge for a while. What does the movement, the Olympic movement, mean to you in a very general sense? And I guess, I mean, not to go into a weird direction, but given the times that we live in, does the Olympics represent something important that you want other people to understand what it is, if that makes sense? Like, what do you want the Olympic movement to mean to other people?
The Olympic movement personally means it's about achievement, it's about opportunity, and it's about performance. Obviously, USA Luge we are a performance-based organization. I think that's the personal side. I think that what I want people to see is, it sounds idealistic, but it is sort of the nations walking in behind the flag. And what I really like also is closing ceremonies where it's a little looser and the athletes walk in a little less organized. And sometimes you see athletes of all nations just kind of in one big jumble coming in. And that is, to me, again, idealistic, yes, but I do think it's an important opportunity for people to see athletes competing, but also fraternizing and forming relationships that last a lifetime in many cases. And that's also sport more broadly.
Gordy, you mentioned before that the sliding competition begins on Saturday, men's on Saturday and Sunday, women's on Sunday and Monday, doubles on Tuesday, team competition, which is my favorite, is on Wednesday. If you're talking to fans, what should they be looking for? What makes a good luge run? How does somebody make up time? How does somebody get on that podium, right? Which is everybody's goal going into the competition.
Well, the first thing you need to win in any luge race is a competitive start. So you want to see quick, explosive pull away from the handles. And then from there, you're looking for strong paddles where you're digging your fingertips, which have spikes on the end of them, into the ice. You're accelerating the sled. And then from there, then it's all about driving the sled. We usually say that you can lose a race at the start, but you can't win a race at the start. You still have about a mile of track that you need to negotiate. So when you're watching a sled go down, you want to see an athlete holding a consistent position. You don't want to see a lot of movement in the body. And you also want to make sure that when you're looking at the lines an athlete drives through a corner, You generally want them to be even. You don't want to see the sled going up and down in a corner. That's creating extra distance. Good position in the sport of luge is toes pointed, head back. You got to fight the urge to look up and see where you're going, because if you pick your head up, you're creating aerodynamic resistance. Yeah, and it's basically you're trying to drive the sled within an inch or two of this imaginary perfect line that doesn't exist. It's not like it's a red line that you're following. And then from there, you're trying to be relaxed as possible, because your body is also like a suspended component of the sled. And then you're making a lot of calculations, even in one curve. You're making a lot of little corrections, and all of this is potentially happening north of 90 miles an hour. So there's a lot going on in our sport. There's a lot of brain power, a lot of focus, a lot of concentration. The best athletes make it look very easy.
When you started saying inches of an imaginary line that doesn't exist, I thought you were going to say inches of your life, and I was like, well, that's a little dark. But man, this sport that you are involved with is you are on the edge of your seat watching these sliders move down the track. It's pretty amazing.
There's sort of a rite of passage if you're involved in the sport. Gordy and his fellow sliders make you go down the track at Lake Placid. But I will say this: you start from about what, Gordy, 2/3 of the way down the track.
Yeah, somewhere around the halfway point.
Right, and so I got on the sled, and I thought I was doing World Cup time, and the late great 𝘠𝘪𝘭𝘢 was at the bottom and congratulating. And I said, "How fast am I going?" Now, keep in mind what Gordy said: you're doing over 90 miles an hour in an Olympic race. Yeah. He goes, maybe 40 miles an hour. Yeah. I go, well, I guess my screaming the entire way down was probably a drag on the aerodynamics.
That reminds me of when I was driving a go-kart in the presence of Bill Elliott, and I thought I was like hauling ass and really like impressed, and that I was going to get out of the car and they were going to be impressed. He goes, "Man, you drive that car like you watch that checkbook. You're driving a little too conservatively to be a race car driver." So that's what you do with sponsors. You give them the luge experience. But I do want to dive back into that question a little bit more on sponsors, because you said it's a unique. It's not the biggest NGB, of course, and right. you're up against these other properties. Does that make that relationship with sponsors that much more important? And if you can give us any examples of sponsorship relationships that have meant something to you personally, have meant something obviously to the governing body overall and to the sliders.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a couple of very key partnerships over the years, and I don't mean to exclude anyone, but the founding of USA Luge, our partnership that started ultimately with New York Telephone and went through all the progenitors, and ultimately with Verizon, which is where I met Tim. That was obviously a very influential partnership, but currently we're working on a almost 50-year relationship with 𝘬𝘁𝘐𝑵𝑒, and that is our primary sponsor. And I think we've got, if you look at some of our sponsorship tenures, we're coming up on 20 years with Dow Chemical. We're coming up with 25 years with our logistics partner, Team Worldwide. One of our small company out of Milwaukee, they've been with us for 35, almost 40 years now. So I think for us, it's all about building those relationships and maintaining them. And it's about being nice and listening and being flexible. And I think that a lot of our partnerships, we start out we usually sign quadrennial deals. And I'm not saying anything that's probably revolutionary, but we look at our starting point on a contract, and then 4 years later look at how the contract is evolved, and how, frankly, we've gotten everything we wanted to do done, but it looks like a totally different relationship, because we've figured out what the strengths and weaknesses and how the partnership evolves. And that flexibility is, I think, something that is very important to the longevity. Like I said, you can't understate the value of the relationships and working together and being friends and really enjoying working with each other.
No, that's great. Congratulations on that, because we know that you can say it and give credit around, but that's because of you and the team there doing a good job with those relationships.
Yeah. Thanks.
And Gordy is too professional and too kind to do this, so I'm going to do it on his behalf. First of all, I've never worked with an organization with nicer people than the ones at USA Luge. They are unbelievable. If you're out there and you are either with a brand listening to this, or you represent a brand and you want to get involved in the Olympic movement, in a way that will make a serious, serious impact on the athletes and their ability to compete for medals on the World Cup circuit and the Olympic stage. Feel free to reach out to myself, or you can, sorry, Gordy, I'm going to do this. Gordy at usaluge.org. Gordy at usaluge.org. Feel free to reach out. You will not be disappointed if you enter into a partnership with USA Luge. All right, Gordy, I want to talk about something else, which I find really, it's very unique among sports in general, Olympic sports in particular. It takes a special kind of person found at a special point or a specific point in their life to find the next generation of luge sliders. Tell us about how you go about finding the next generation of sliding athletes.
Sure.
I think it's fascinating.
We have a program called Slider Search, sponsored by 𝘬𝘬𝘊𝘬𝘳, by the way. I hope you appreciate the pun marketing.
Most authentic, even better than Vlasic Pickles and Pickleball. White Castle and a Slider Search. They were his Moby Dick. Gordy went after them for I don't know how many years, and he did not give up, and he got them. And how long have they been a partner now?
This is our 10th year with White Castle. Yeah. So the Slider Search basically takes wheeled luge sleds, and we go from city to city around the country during the spring, summer, and fall. We look for kids aged 10 to 13, put them on wheeled sleds, have them drive through some cones, give them some basic physical tests, and we invite the best 100 or so that we see during the course of the tour each year. And then we will try those kids on ice, see how they do, and then from there we'll whittle that down to about 10 or 12 kids each year that get put onto our what we call our Youth National B team, which is sort of the first step in the development ladder for USA Luge's national team. That's our primary recruiting program. We have a couple of other programs. We have a luge on ski hill program called the Luge Challenge, and that has a primary marketing function, but a secondary recruiting function. And we've actually found some great athletes through there as well, including 𝘠𝘫𝘫𝘀, who will be competing and going for gold in a couple of weeks' time here in Cortina.
Yeah, that's a name for you listeners to follow, 𝘠𝘫𝘫𝘀. Well, this will be her third games?
Correct. Fourth, I apologize, Tim.
Fourth.
Yeah.
Sorry, and the other thing I would say is you mentioned that you're looking for kids 10 to 13 because if they get on the sled any later than that, they won't have enough time to develop, right, before they sort of age out of the possibility of becoming a world-class slider, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a numbers game for us. And if you can get an athlete started, by age 11 with 200 or 300 runs versus someone who starts at 13 or 14 with no runs, the brain and the body are in that sort of sponge state at that age. And statistically, I'm sure we could find some 15-year-olds who could be good in the future. But when you're crunching the numbers, you got to go for those younger kids to get them those runs as early as possible.
Especially when you're, going back to the whole need for sponsors, right? It is not inexpensive to develop the next generation of sliders. So you've got to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah. And, I just do want to circle back on that sponsorship issue because you alluded to it, Tim, but one thing about USA Luge, we do four things. We recruit, we develop, we train, and we support athletes. And we're unlike a lot of other sports. We have to go out and find them. It's not like we're track and field where, those athletes are delivered to them after having gone through NCAA programs. USA Track and Field can kind of pluck from all the best. We're a little bit different. We're a cradle to grave organization. And I don't mean that in a we're killing our athletes kind of way. But to that end, sponsorship dollars really they're absolutely critical to us because without that support, we can't do what we're doing. So this is where I thank our sponsors.
Tim will ask the closing questions, but I couldn't let this go, and I'm going to apologize to you two fine gentlemen for what I'm about to ask.
And you use that term very loosely, but go ahead.
But once we knew you were going to be on this show, and I had been reading up on the Norwegian ski jumping scandal, cheating scandal, my question was to you, if in luge you were going to do a similar technique, what would be, and have there been great cheating scandals in luge, and what would be the uniform or equivalent of expanding the spatialness of the crotch area in the ski jump. Sorry.
Expanding the spatialness of the crotch area. That's a phrase I'm going to have to remember.
I don't know how else to say it, but that's kind of what they did, right? Am I
They
wrong?
created a bat wing, so to speak, right?
Well, but this was even more. That was the older one. This was specifically like
the crotch region was like
right.
another wing
Correct.
to increase air surface, so that the lift continues for longer, if I understand it correctly.
I feel bad that they just thought people from Norway wouldn't, although I do know they actually do analyze those things before to have a maximum. So anyway, but there have to have been some reasonably fun cheating scandals in luge.
Well, there's been some funny ones. And there weren't really cheating, but there were, if you look at, I think it was the 76 Olympics, the East Germans showed up. They looked like the Coneheads.
Wait, what?
From Saturday Night.
The East Germans?
Yeah. They looked like the Coneheads from Saturday Night Live. And what they were trying to do is close the turbulence zone behind their helmets. So they showed up with these gigantic Coneheads. And so that was always a good one. And then there's a rule about heating runners. And runners have to be within a certain temperature range. There's rules about suspension systems. We were talking earlier about, having clauses in marketing contracts before we started the podcast. But the rule book is kind of similar in that it's a list of past offenses and tightening things up. So, there's maybe not any specific examples, but the Coneheads are probably one of the funniest funniest loopholes that we've seen with teams taking advantage of it.
Yeah, the most interesting thing about those Conehead things is they detracted from the fact that the men were competing as women for the East Germans. I think they actually rolled those helmets out in Booger Yugoslavia at the World Cup race there. And there's a big controversy on another sliding sport, which is a different national governing body, but with bobsled.
Yeah.
And, Katie Eulander, who you know quite well, got denied the chance to compete in her fourth Olympic Games as a 41-year-old sliding athlete, which I think is really, really, those damn Canadians. I think South Park has it right.
What?
The last I read was
people.
The last I read was that they were actually bringing it up to the IOC to see if they could get some relief in that case. But anyway, that's an episode for another day. Before we let you go, Gordy, you've been a great sport, and we appreciate it very much. 2 questions that we ask every guest. The first one is,
where'd your career get started? Where'd you start it?
yours is probably one of the most unique stories that we'll hear from people that we've interviewed, but would love to hear it from you directly.
So I got my start. My start in luge was as a 12-year-old or 11-year-old, whatever I was, driving down the street in Lake Placid on a family ski trip, and a van drove by with a telephone number for USA Luge. I called that number, and 2 weeks later, I was on a sled. And then I retired from competition 17 years after that, and I joked that I kind of hung around the luge office until they hired me. I was running a fantasy camp program that actually is still alive today, that I still run. And there was some staffing changes, and I was just kind of sitting in the office, and the executive director at the time said, "All right, we give up, you're hired." And that was my start. I did have a degree in communications from the Ohio State University. So
was that Ron Rossi who hired you?
Yes, it was. It was Ron.
Yeah. And I've actually got a picture that I am going to share with David of you as a very young sliding athlete.
No, we're using it.
Yeah, with somebody who I talked about earlier, 𝘠𝘭𝘠𝘕, and you can't be much older than 13 or 14 in this picture.
No,
you know the one I'm talking about.
I
right?
know the one. Yep, I know the picture.
Yeah, 𝘠𝘭𝘠𝘕, what a phenomenal human being.
He was.
I'm going to ask the last question.
Okay.
What one piece of advice would you have for somebody looking to break into the sports industry, whether it's somebody transitioning from a career as an athlete into the business world, or just somebody coming out of school who wants to get into the sports industry?
One piece of advice?
We'll give you two, since you've been such a good sport.
Okay. I would say listen and be nice. I mean, I think those are probably two very basic human nature things, but I think it gets lost in the business world a lot, where people lose that flexibility and ability to listen to each other, and it gets nasty quick. And I think that all ties into the flexibility part. At the end of the day, a deal that works is one where both parties are happy. And if one side is ramming stuff down the throat of the other and not listening and not being nice to each other, then you're not moving forward. So again, I know I'm speaking in very overly simple terms, but they get forgotten, I believe, sometimes.
I think you're absolutely right. I always paraphrase the late French philosopher Voltaire, who said common sense is not so common, right? Same could be said for common courtesy and common decency.
Yeah.
So I think that's phenomenal advice. Listen, Gordy, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Good luck to the team over in Italy starting in a couple of weeks. We are going to be rooting not only for all of Team USA, but particularly for the sliding athletes that are going to be competing on luge sleds. You know that you guys have been near and dear to my heart for over 20 years now. So I'm really excited to see the team succeed.
Likewise, and thank you both. And yeah, Tim, we longtime friendship, and we look forward to continuing that. And thanks to you both, and best of luck the rest of your shows in the future.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We are back. Thank you again to 𝘠𝘪𝘵 from USA Luge. David, keep me honest here. I think that might have been the first Olympic medalist that we've had as a guest on the show in 5 years.
I think that's right. We're going to have to look at that in the future.
Yeah, but this is the part of the show where we take a look forward. We give shout outs. We thank our listeners. David, what's on your mind?
Well, a couple things. First, congratulations on the big Cornell win over Harvard, 4-1. I saw that. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and they actually, more importantly, they beat Dartmouth the night before in overtime, which was ranked higher in the polls.
Well, I know that you set it up last week or two, whenever it was, about that big game, or the game that matters. A couple other shout outs. There was an event on I think that ended up going Saturday night because it was originally scheduled for Friday, but they had some weather. Netflix ran a live event of Alex Honnold, who is the climber who did the movie that won an Oscar, Free Solo, where he climbed El Capitan without any ropes. A fascinating event. He climbed tower, I think it's called Taipei 101 in Taipei, free solo. And he did it in like an hour and a half. They were projecting 2.5 hours. Live on Netflix. No nets, no anything.
Yeah, 10-second delay, God forbid, though.
Yeah. Well, and part of the reason I give the shout out is a very dear friend of mine, Al Berman, was the showrunner on this and the executive producer. And it was I think, 20-year endeavor trying to get this made. Al has always had a fascination. Al is the guy that pretty much invented the live reveal reality shows. He's a former CBS morning show producer. I mean, this guy's creds are unbelievable.
Right.
But he did the original Survivor live reveals. He did the Apprentice shows. He has done so many reality shows, and he's a big kind of outdoor guy. And this was a huge accomplishment. I can't wait for what his next project is going to be. I actually want to try to get him on the show. I don't know what the final numbers were. I asked Al this morning, and Netflix hasn't released them. But I will tell you this, the following and the engagement on X was unbelievable, including from the athletic world. So I think people look at Alex and say, this guy's as amazing an athlete as I've ever seen. So I think that was one of the reasons I did want to shout it out. But it was drama. It was high drama.
Yeah, so there was
stressful.
one. So the climber, a guy by the name of Alex Honnold, I think he said, he said he did it for, in his terms, an embarrassingly low amount of money.
Well,
I don't know what that is.
Apparently, it's $500,000, which I think, and that's part of the reason. Well, listen, climbers aren't exactly. It's not like they're signing, free agent contracts.
Right.
So he has to get it where he gets it, I guess. But if he does another thing, and this guy's in unbelievable shape. The stuff he does is pretty remarkable. So I can't wait for his next adventure, but I also can't wait for what Al does next, and I hope he comes up with something. I'd love to have a chat with him about what it's like putting a show with someone like that on, who a lot of people are like, you have a family now. Why would you do this?
Yeah.
And he's like, this is what I do, and I hope I inspire people to do hard things in their lives. I'm not expecting people to go climb, skyscrapers. But the show was called Skyscraper Live.
And there was one point where there was an observation deck, and there were people inside the observation deck, and they're banging on the windows like it's a monkey cage at a zoo. They're taking photos, and on their phone. That was driving
me crazy. I'm like, why'd they let him do that? But he said that didn't bother him. I'm like, how did that not bother him? They're like going, and he's, how much do you have to concentrate to do that? Yeah. I don't care what his shoe equipment and how sticky they were or whatever that was, but it was very cool.
I would have cheated. I would have put a parachute on my back.
Yeah.
Just in case.
And he clearly didn't have that because you could tell he had absolutely nothing on. There were parts of the building where he clearly could have just gone like this, but he had the paths, and that's what he does. He practices the path, which he did at 𝘚𝘭𝘓𝗏, which was even a little wilder. Anyway,
his uniform was even tighter than a Norwegian ski jumpers.
Well, it's a huge congratulations to Alex and a huge congratulations to Al, because I know what this meant to him. And Al Berman, by the way, is like one of the greatest guys you'll ever meet.
Very cool. Let's get him on.
And so, speaking of Oscars, F1 the movie got nominated for all the categories we would suspect it would, but also is up for Best Picture, which kind of blows me away. I'm not sure it should have elevated to that category. Fine movie, but there are a couple other ones that very, very deserving.
Mm-hmm.
As far as what I'm watching for, I am excited about the Farmers this weekend from Torrey Pines. I want to see how that kind of all plays out. Obviously, we have another week to go before Super Bowl. I think we're going to need to follow a couple stories, and Mike Reisman last week talked a lot about the intersection between politics and sports right now. I've read that ICE is the unit that may be going over to the winter games.
Yes.
To handle some things. That seems to me to be a bad miscalculation given all the things going on with ICE right now and what that's going to mean, because there's enough stuff going on in Europe right now against the United States. I wonder about that. And then the commissioners meeting that was supposed to happen at the White House, where all of the main sports commissioners were supposed to meet with the president in Washington, got canceled. They're saying due to weather. Is that something that people are going to try to get out of?
Yeah. All right. So
what about you?
Couple things I'm looking at. Number one, I'm really interested to see what the conference championship ratings are, given that over 200 million people were impacted by storms this past weekend. Yes, there was some power outages in certain places, but it reminds me of the 1979 Daytona 500. For those of you who aren't familiar, that was really the race that put NASCAR on the map. It was held in mid-February. Interesting trivia point, it was not the first race of the season that year. It was actually the second race. But it was run while the Northeast was socked in with a blizzard. So it was broadcast live, pole to pole, on CBS. Donnie Allison and 𝘚𝘭𝘪𝘏𝘀 battling it out till the end. They got in a crash. At the end of the race, it allowed the king, Richard Petty, to come in and win, fourth or sixth Daytona 500. Even better, that after the race, Donnie Allison's brother, Bobby, got into it with his brother and 𝘚𝘭𝘪𝘏𝘀 on the infield. Yeah. It was the King's sixth Daytona 500. It did BAFO ratings, and it really put NASCAR on the map. And that was sort of the beginning of NASCAR ascending as the premier motorsports.
And we all learned who Chris Economaki was.
Yeah.
And yeah, the fight with Allison and Yarborough was just classic. And there's no way the cars can do what they did. They were like sideways banging into each other coming around the turn. It was like Days of Thunder racing.
You had guys like Petty and Yarborough and Donnie Allison and those guys. They were awesome. And so my long-winded point is that we may see that kind of lift in ratings for these two conference championship games. So it'll be interesting. So I'm waiting to see that. Another thing I'm keeping an eye on, Germany. And Germany is always one of the leading countries in the World Cup, is asking for countries to consider boycotting the upcoming World Cup games. Now, I wouldn't put it past the Germans to get everybody else to drop out and they go, okay, we'll come back and they'll win a 10-country tournament. No, but seriously, I think it's come to that point where people are talking seriously about that.
I know France has come out and said they don't think doing it's an idea, but the rumblings obviously are there. The rumblings are there. and it's absolutely something we're going to need to keep an eye on.
And the last thing I'm keeping an eye on is something we've talked about in the past is Wrexham. They're not at the top of the table in the AFL, but they're playing very well. They're considering doing the biggest transfer payment in EFL history. They are not giving up on the dreams of being promoted once again, this time to the Premier League. I don't think it's going to happen, but it may not be 5 or 6 years like we talked about when they originally promoted from third division to the second division. It might be a couple of years. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on for the long term. So with that, thank you, partner, for once again having a great discussion. Thanks to 𝘕𝘠𝘠𝘀. If you're interested, 𝘕𝘠𝑠𝑎luge.org. They would love your help as sponsors, and I can tell you that it is very, very cost effective. And no, I do not get paid for bringing in sponsors to USA Luge. If you like what you hear, like, subscribe, follow, comment, tell your friends, send us comments. You can find all of our social handles as well as where you can find the audio podcast and our YouTube thing on dpandmcgee.com. Until next week, he's DP, I'm McGee, and we'll talk soon.